Welcome to the second National Saturday for our module. I hope you find it as interesting and engaging as the last one. So the introductory session today, as Rihanna said, we'll just have sort of an overview of the day, but we've also got some tips, if you like, to take forward for your next academic assignment. So hopefully it will help you to improve your marks there. So just some things to consider. So just before we get started to look at some of those key points, just a reminder that the delivered bits for the sessions will be recorded and they'll be made available to you on PebblePad at some point next week. We'll be using breakout rooms again for those all-important, discussions. Those bits won't be recorded, and neither will the feedback from the activities at those sessions. So just so you're aware of that. And obviously within those breakout rooms and those activities, if you could, unmute yourselves, turn your cameras on so that you can, have those really engaging and valuable discussions. Also, don't forget to use the chat function throughout the day if you want to comment on anything or ask any questions as well. I've put the PowerPoint for this introductory session in the chat, so hopefully everybody is able to access that and download the slides there. This session is bilingual, so I do apologise. Some of the slides are a little busy, but hopefully you'll be able to focus in on, your preferred language as we go through the slides for this short introductory session. There is quite a lot to get through, so I will move on if I can. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So this next slide is just the overview of what to expect from the day. And it's going to follow a similar format to the previous National Saturdays that we've been engaged in. So after the welcome bit, we go into the sort of the delivery sessions, if you like. And the session today will be based on Core Strand 3 and Core Strand 4. So we'll have the first session, and then we'll have a short break, and we'll have the Ask Our Expert, which is Tristan Williams, who's an Elenco from a large Welsh medium setting within Cardiff, and he'll be talking about his role as the Elenco from a leadership and management perspective. We'll then have a short lunch and come back for the afternoon sessions. As you can see, there'll be a short break in between those. And then we'll aim to finish the day at 3:15. So just a short overview of what we're going to include today. The next couple of slides is just a reminder really of the assessment. I'm sure you don't need reminding of the assessment, but just to introduce, remind you of some of the key points today. I'm not going to go through the assessment in detail because we did that within the last National Saturday, and you also had sort of support sessions honing in on certain activities within the last National Saturday as well. So if you did want to review anything, I'd advise you to go back to those recordings and have a little look. But just very briefly, you'll be doing a patchwork text and it will equivalent to 4,000 words. And the core strands that we've been doing for this module contribute to that patchwork, and they're around or equivalent to 1,000 word each. But remember, you will submit your work as one document, and there'll be a proforma available through the virtual learning environment through your various HEI. So that should be available and you'll submit it as one document. This slide just outlines the various different activities that you will be engaging in as part of those core strand activities that will complete for the assessment. So the first one and the second one, so core strand 1 activity and the core strand 2 activity, that presentation and self-evaluation will be you've looked at in more detail within the previous National Saturday. So again, just a reminder to go back to that, to those recordings if you want more detail. And I'm sure that you've been discussing within your HEIs as well. Core Strand 3 activity, which is an academic poster, and Core Strand 4 activity, which is the critical evaluation piece of writing, will be looked at in a little bit more detail in the presentations later on today. So there will be additional guidance for those particular patchworks within those sessions later today. One thing just to point out actually is that there has been an additional sort of guidance document on how to do academic posters on PebblePad. That's been uploaded recently, so that's available in the assignment section if you did want to have a little look at that as well. Also, just to remind you, other elements to support this assessment are obviously the discussion within your individual HEIs, but do remember the criteria is available for you to look at, so you can see what needs to go in and what's going to be looked at within each piece, and those example assignments as well. One other thing that we thought might be quite useful to do is to create sort of a Padlet for any questions that you might have. So you can click on the link here or use the QR scanner to access that Padlet and ask any questions that you might have related to the assessment. We'll keep an eye on it throughout today. And if relevant, we will draw on some of those questions and answer those. If we don't do that today, what we'll do is compile a frequently asked question document and share that with you. So I did post the link in the chat earlier. I'm not sure if people who've joined later will be able to access that, but I'll pop that link into the chat again following this introductory presentation for you. So that's kind of all the introduction bits we just wanted to highlight. So we'll move on now for you to think about some tips for your assignments or pointers for your assignments going forward. And we wanted to include this again, just to help you sort of improve your marks or avoid sort of losing marks in particular areas. And we decided that it might be useful to look at correct citations and critical writing. And these are based on the previous ALN module and other modules throughout the MA on sort of the key areas that might be useful to think about moving forward. So hopefully you can take at least a couple of points away and it will help you perhaps to engage a little bit further and improve those marks a little bit further in your academic work. So the first one we're going to look at then is critical citations. Now, this is the only slide I'm kind of going to include here, and we want to do it in sort of a more visual way, hence the style of this slide. It's not my intention, and it doesn't make the most exhilarating presentation to just go through the referencing format, so I won't be doing that, don't worry. But I'm just using this slide to highlight some of the common pitfalls, really, or things to be aware of when you're writing sort of your next academic piece of work. Just to note as well, before we do this, we all do use, the different institutions here today do use Harvard referencing systems when referencing. There may be some minor differences, but generally the formatting remains the same. So what I'd advise you to do is just to refer back to your HEI website guidance for Harvard referencing, or if your department's given you a handbook when you started the MA, to use that closely when you're doing your work. But like I said, we just wanted to highlight some of the key things. So one of the key things we wanted to just emphasize here was the difference between referencing within the main body of the essay and the bibliography or reference list. So it's just a reminder really, and just to be aware of when you're doing your next bit of work. In the essay, it's just the author's surname and the date that we need. So I should say author or author's surname and date that we need. Okay, no initials, okay? But obviously if you are using direct quotations, then you would use a quotation mark and the page number. So just a reminder of that. Now, some institutions might require you to use the P before the page number as well. So again, just to be mindful of the formatting within your HEI. It's in the bibliography then that we need that additional information, so we know what type of source it is and where that information has come from. So again, I'm not going to go through sort of the formatting of the different sources. You can use your guidance documents to do that as you compile your reference list for your assignment. The other thing we just wanted to draw out was to do with the use of brackets. If the author or author's surname is part of the sentence, the bracket is only around the date. If the author's or author's surname isn't part of the sentence, it goes within those brackets. Again, minor things, but just things to be aware of, so that you won't be losing any marks in relation to that. And finally, the other key point that we just wanted to draw out was that the bibliography will be in alphabetical order. We've color coded it here to highlight that. Obviously yours won't be color coordinated, but it just kind of gives that sort of visual element to it here. For example, Bosworth is at the end of that paragraph on the slide there, but is at the start of the bibliography because B is towards the start of the alphabet. So like I said, nothing particularly groundbreaking there, but just, you know, just things to be aware of moving forward and for you to keep an eye on. This next line just highlights, you know, the difference between some universities using P or not. And like I said, you can use your guidance documents within your HEIs to follow that in a bit more detail when you're doing your work. There are a couple of additional slides towards the end of this presentation that I've included after the bibliography. And these are kind of additional slides that have just got some other pointers on for referencing to do with the common sources that you might be using. Again, you can look at those within your own time. But they're just there as a reminder, really, of how you might reference those documents within the text and outside of the and within the reference list. The next thing we just thought we'd highlight is critical writing. And the reason we wanted to do that is because it's often an area that students require support on within higher education, whether they're undergraduates or postgraduates. And it is considered a prized skill within higher education. So it is important to, you know, be aware of and to kind of engage in so that you are improving those marks there. And you can see from the example on the slide here that critical evaluation, critical examination will award you those higher marks. So it is important to be aware of and think about in a bit more detail. I could spend a whole sort of session looking at critical writing. So we're just drawing out some of the key points really to help support you with developing this and some key points that you might use going forward. So when we're talking about critical writing, we're talking about, and Bangor University have got a really useful document, which is in the bibliography list here, if you want to go away and think about and look at that in a bit more detail. But we're talking about engaging in an academic debate, and that means moving beyond description. So you need to be able to weigh up the different arguments and evidence that you're looking at. And you need to also be able to kind of put your own slant within that, your own perspective within that as you're working through the ideas. And it does involve going beyond description. And Bangor lists lots of different things that it does, you do need to do to engage in critical writing. And I've kind of included the list there. Again, and I'm not going to go through that just because of time and because, you know, you'll be able to look at that in more detail. But some of the key things it does involve is that questioning, challenging approach, being objective, so not taking things at face value, making sure you're using evidence rather than opinion to back up your key points. Involves looking at different points of view, so different sides of the debate, and it also involves you drawing conclusions from the evidence that you've looked at to answer the question that you've been given. Like I said, I could talk about this for quite a while, but I'm going to move on for time to some of the key pointers that you might want to think about in order to, you know, improve your work, and hopefully you can take at least a couple of these forward within your next piece of writing. It does, I will sort of say is critical writing does involve other skills. It's important, given that critical writing is, you know, based on a well-reasoned argument, a well-researched argument. Other skills are really important to ensure you're able to write critically in an effective way. So planning, reading, researching are really important to make sure you're identifying those key arguments and that you're able to, you know, write about them in a structured and effective way. So if any of those areas you think I could work a little bit more at, or I might need to spend a bit more time on, you might want to think about doing that. Make sure you're considering various viewpoints, okay? So the strengths and the weaknesses or the limitations and ideas. One question that can also be quite useful to take critical writing forward is thinking about, do others support this? So often individuals might use one source to think about an idea or to support an idea. Well, that's fine, because that's fine. but that only tells you one person's point of view. What have other people said about this? Do they support this? Do they have different ideas? So you can see, if you think about that question, it might allow you to sort of build in, you know, a more and develop your arguments further. But it's important not just to string quotes together. Okay, it's not about doing that. It's being able to identify the similarities and differences between those sources, and using signposted language, so things such as in support of, in contrast to, similarly, differently, can help you to do that a little bit more explicitly. One source that might be quite useful to look at, and I've included the link here, is the Academic Phrase Bank. And that gives you ideas on how you might introduce how you're writing critically. And it's got lots of different things on that. So if you haven't looked at that already in your time studying your masters, it might be useful to do so following this. The other thing as well is to think about, you know, tell us why it's important to include. Okay, if you've included something, don't just list it there. Why is it important? It's that so what element. And I'm just still conscious of the time, so I'm just going to draw out 2 points from this next slide here. Avoid sweeping statements. Okay, and that might seem really obvious, but it's amazing how many times generalizations do kind of crop up in people's work, and particularly unsubstantiated ones. So do make sure that you're not making sweeping statements within your work, and it might be a simple proofread will help you to avoid that. And also to consider the source of the study itself. How recent has that source been published? You know, have more recent ideas supported that, or have ideas changed? Think about the methods that are used. Is the article that you might be reading, is it a small study, a small scale study, or is it a larger sample? So those are the types of things that you can think about as well when trying to write in a critical way. And it may be, if that's a little unclear, you might want to speak with your HEA, within your HEA groups, and think about that in a bit more detail. And finally, just remember, draw conclusions from that evidence. Make sure you're drawing conclusions in order to answer the question. That's it from me, really. So thank you for listening. I know there was quite a lot there, but do make sure that you think about that, and hopefully a couple of those points are useful moving forward. Just to highlight the resources there that might be useful if you do want to look at any of this in a bit more detail. I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I do apologise for going a little bit over there.